Hello and welcome to another LeetCode problem. Today we're going to be continuing on with the JavaScript challenge, and we're going to be doing problem number 2633, convert object to JSON string. So you're given an object and you want to return a valid JSON string of that object. You may assume the object only includes strings, integers, arrays, objects, booleans, and null. The return string should not include extra spaces. The order of the key should be kept the same as the order returned by object.keys. Please solve it without using the built-in JSON.stringify method. So the JSON.stringify method actually does take a JSON object and turn it into a string. So if you were to just write JSON stringify on something, that would pretty much solve it. But we're not going to do that here. We're just going to go over how everything works and the flow we need to follow. Okay, so let's take a look at the examples. In the first example, we're given an object and we need to return this. So first of all, we note that we need to actually have these brackets as part of a string. So these are all going to be output strings. And then as you can see for the keys, we need to write double quotes. So we need to add double quotes to the keys because they're just normally going to be a string, but we actually need to add double quotes that are visible. And then for the second one, I'm not going to draw it out, but we're just going to take a look. So it's the same kind of thing. We need to add these brackets and we need to add double quotes to the keys. And they're just showing what types of input is viable. And then for the third one, it's saying you can have nested objects and arrays in your object, so you want to be able to handle nested objects. And for the fourth one, it's a boolean. So this output true is technically a string. It just doesn't have the quotes. So let's think about kind of like the flow of things we need. So remember, what are objects in JavaScript actually, right? So what types of things are objects? So one, null is an object, so we need to handle that case. Arrays are objects. And then finally, normal objects. There might be something else I'm missing, but as far as I know, out of these things, these are the only ones. And so we can't just check for like an object type and start going through the keys. First, we have to check for null. Then we have to check for arrays. And then finally, we can say, okay, now if our type is an object, let's do a normal object, let's do a normal object case. That's the order we're going to go through. You could go array and then null and then object, but because nulls are objects and arrays are objects, you have to check for those first. Okay, so once we do those, what's left? So we have some primitive types. So we have, what do we have left, right? So these are objects. Let's just click that off here. We actually have strings, right? And then finally, we just have like normal primitive types. So let's just call it primitive. Because for strings, it'll be different. So let's go through each one of these. So for null, what do we do? Well, that's pretty straightforward, right? We just return a string with null, essentially. Okay. For arrays, we actually need to say, we need to turn the array into a string. So we need to do something like add these quotes, put an array, and then we actually need to return the elements, right? So like 1, 2, 3, whatever, right? But we also need to make sure that these elements are turned to strings as well. And so we're going to actually recursively call this toString method on all of these elements. And then we're going to add it all into some container. And then that container is going to be separated with commas. It's going to have these brackets on the outside and turned into a string. Okay, what about the objects? So the object is going to be a similar kind of thing where we're going to turn it into a string. We're going to have these like squiggly brackets. And then for every key, we need to add double quotes. So key, we need to add double quotes, and then it's going to be with v, and the value also needs to be recursively going through the string, right? Because like a value can be an array or something. So this value actually needs to be recursed, get a valid value, get a string value, and then finally put that in there. And then it's going to have a bunch of these. So this key will have, and then they're going to be separated by commas. So similar to array, except array, we're going to take the values, we're going to recursively call this string method on it, and we're going to do the same thing with the object. We don't need to do the string method on the keys because the keys are already strings, but what you do need to do on the keys is you need to add these double quotes. So for the string, if we just have like a normal string, we need to manually add double quotes. And then for the primitive type, we just simply turn it into a string. So we just put quotes around it and whatever, true or whatever the primitive type is. So let's actually figure out how to turn a string, like this might get a little confusing, but we need to figure out how do we actually add quotes to a string. because I'm going to show you this in the code. So let's say we have a test string, right? Let's just say we have const test equals a string. Okay, well, what happens if we print that? Right, so think about what you expect to see. Let's take a look. So you see it just says test, but you don't have the quotes. So to actually add the quotes, we need to do something else. And so we're actually going to use the like a format string. And so the way it works in Java string is, I think it's called a template literal. So the way it works is you can have these kinds of quotes, and then you have a $sign, and then you have these parens, and essentially anything in here can just be like a normal variable. So we can just throw this test into here. So this is not like this is actually taking the variable, not like a string, right? So it's taking the variable, and then we add these things to the outside just to make sure this whole thing is a format string, kind of like an f in Python. Similar, works in a similar way. Okay, so let's see. What do you think this will happen? Like, what do you think this will print? Let's take a look. So this still prints test, and because we throw our stuff into a format string, we're still not getting these quotes. So what we actually need to do to get these quotes is we need to actually have these quotes as part of the string inside. And so it actually needs to look like this. So this is how you would add the actual quotes. And so this is what we need to do to the keys and to strings. We need to do this kind of format where we have a format string, and then we put these quotes manually in there along with the variable, right? And so if test was a Boolean, which is set to false, then we wouldn't need these quotes, but this would still turn it into a string. We just wouldn't see the quotes, right? So if we do something like this, it is false, but this is a string false, not a Boolean. So we can even say like type. I think we should be able to print this. Let's take a look. Right, so it's a string, not a Boolean. So to turn a primitive type into a string, we can just use this format string, and then if you manually want to add quotes, you have to actually throw in quotes. So now that we know that, we kind of have enough to be coding, so let's start coding. So now we should have enough to be coding, so let's start coding, and let's look through our cases. So our first case, if it's null, right? And then we have an array, then we have an object, then we have a string. So let's do the null case first. So if object equals null, that's pretty straightforward, right? So what we need to do is we need to return null, but we need to return it in string format. Okay. Our second case is if we have an array, and so what we need to do there is we need to use this array.isArray, pretty useful function, and then that'll tell us if we have an array. Okay, so if it is an array, what do we need to do? So we actually need to return, and we're going to use this template literal, and we're going to actually use a map on the, like I said, we're going to need to take the values of the array, and we're going to need to map them we're going to recursively map them with this JSON stringify method to get string versions of the values. So let's do that. So we're going to do this, because we do need to have these squiggly brackets on the outside of it, right? And then what we need to do is we need to have, we're going to call this, and it's going to be object.map JSON stringify. JSON stringify. Okay. And so, believe it or not, so normally a map returns an array, right? So like, for example, if we do have, I think I showed this before, but like this, map will return an array. So these values will turn into strings, but because they are actually because they're in this template literal, it will actually return these strings, and it will automatically join them together. So they won't be in an array, they'll automatically be joined with commas. And so it'll actually look like this. Yeah, so it will actually be joined for you. So you don't even need a dot join here. And I was testing this out earlier, which is definitely kind of weird. But yeah, so if you want to look into that, you can. But yeah, so normally with a map, you would think like all these strings would be in an array separately, so you have to do a dot join, but you don't actually have to do that because they're in a template literal already. If they weren't in a template literal, then you would have to do a dot join. But because they are, it manually joins them for you. Okay, so now let's go for the object. So if type of object equals object, we're going to be doing a similar thing. except now we need to take the keys and then we're going to manually go through the keys and then get the key value pairs. So like keys equals object dot keys of the object, and then we're going to be doing very similar thing here. So let's just actually let's rewrite it because there will be some differences. Okay, so what do we need to do first? So we need to have these squiggly brackets outside of the object, right? And we're going to do the same thing though, where it's going to be keys.map. So we actually have this $sign to let us know that it's not a string in here, it's actually something else. So the difference here is we need to actually make a custom function in the map because we need to take a key and return a key value pair, and then we need to manually put parentheses outside of like on the key, and then we need to have key and then this and then the value. But then remember we need to actually call JSON stringify on the value. So let's do that. So we're going to return another template literal here with the key, but remember our key needs to actually be in quotes. So it's going to be key colon, and then here it's going to be the value, but it needs to be JSON stringify. And then so this is like actually this is going to be object key, just like in Python, right? So okay, and I think that's it there. Hopefully, I didn't miss any parentheses or anything, but we will find out. Let's take a look. Key equals object stringify. Let's see. Does this map? Where does this map end? That's fine. Key, JSON stringify, object key. Yeah, it looks reasonable. We'll find out in the future. Okay, so that's going to be that. And once again, we don't need a join because, believe it or not, this will be an array of keys, but because they're in a template literal, sorry, an array of key value pairs, but because they're in a template literal, it will join them for you because they're all strings. So JavaScript will manually join them and put commas in between them. So you don't actually need a join there either. Okay, now we finally have a string. So for a string, pretty straightforward, right? We can just return, talked about this already. What we need to do is we need to actually throw the quotes in there, so we can throw them in like this. And then we can say object like this. And then finally, for our last case, it's going to be a primitive type. So for the primitive type, it's going to be same as a string, but we don't actually need to add these double quotes. We just need to turn it into a string. So we can do that. Yeah, let's test this out. Just here. Hopefully I wrote these correctly. Yeah, so I think I may have missed something here. So let's just see. So if we have a key, we need to do JSON stringify, object, key. How many closings? I think we might be missing one. But let's see. I'm not entirely sure. No, okay, so that was not it. So let me just check this. I think this part should be fine. Yeah, this part should be fine. This part should be fine. Well, what is it actually doing? Let's take a look. Oh, we're missing a. We're missing the squiggly brackets on the outside, right? That's what we were missing. Yeah. So for the object, we need to actually manually add squiggly brackets on both sides. Okay, there we go. Okay, so it looks good. And yeah, that's going to be it for this problem. Hopefully you liked it. And if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.